Hey, it's Wednesday. Welcome to the show. My name is Mike. This is the Leadership Toolkit. As you know, your definitive leadership growth podcast, leadership development podcast. So, as we do each week, I have awesome guests on from all over the world. And we talk about different verticals of business, entrepreneurship, sometimes family life, what affects, leadership and life and people so that you can grow and so that the people in your circle can grow. Because that's one of the most important things in leadership is that you bring people along with you. Because I've said it before, like John Maxwell says, if you're headed to the top of the mountain and you end up by yourself, you're not a leader, you're a hiker. So you got to bring people with you. So today I've got an absolutely phenomenal guest. We were talking a little bit beforehand. He's in Italy. This will be my first guest interview in Italy, which is super exciting to me. Nikolai Nielsen, he's the founder of Potential Academy. It's an online personal development platform with a mission to raise global consciousness through education and inspiration. That's why I love him already, because that's what I do. Education, inspiration, leadership, motivation, management, all of those things that help us grow our potential as people. So with that, I introduce to you today, Nikolai Nielsen. Nikolai, thank you so much for taking the time to tune in or make the time for our guests to tune in and visit with you today. Appreciate it.
Great to be here, Mike. And it's been a while since I've been on a podcast that had the word leadership in it. So that's always nice to get a bit back to the roots in a way.
Absolutely. Well, if you would take a few minutes and if you would expand on what is your background, what's your management background, leadership background, where you're at in life, and then let's break into, you sent me some really good points for discussion, and I am stoked to get into some conversation about this today.
Wonderful. So briefly about myself, I do see myself as a citizen of the world. I'm ethnically Danish Chinese, was born in Brazil and moved around most of my life, which again, I feel very fortunate about. I enjoyed that a lot. Wanted to be a professional soccer player, football player growing up, and really went for it full speed. But then at 18 decided that that wasn't the path I was going to do. Went into university, classic business background. And then went into consulting, actually. So I was in management consulting for 10 years, working with McKinsey in Dubai and also in New York. And the last 4 years, I've actually been setting up my own business, Potential Academy, doing a lot of online personal development, written a number of books that we can also talk about. And 4 years ago, also made the decision to move to Italy, which was driven much more by my broader life, let's say, aspirations from a personal point of view. So that's been definitely a journey to craft the life I want to live, but also create a business that I want to scale and do good with in the world. So that's just briefly about myself. A lot of topics we can jump into, Mike.
Absolutely. No, I love the background. So you wanted to be a professional soccer player, like on the world stage, like at that level, like.
I did. I mean, that was as early as I can remember, when I was 5, just like that was the single-minded focus I had. I was good and did play at a high level at the junior levels, but never, I realized over time that I would never be as good as I had hoped. And then it took a couple of years to fully, let's say, be honest with myself. Other people around me could probably see it. And then essentially came down to, did I want to be a good but not great player and really sacrifice a lot to get there? Or did I want to pivot? And that's what I decided to do.
And so when you pivoted into like management leadership development directly from there, or where did you pivot from that? And
So
can you tell me, I'm sorry, I start asking questions, my brain goes, pew, ask another one over here. What age was that you came to terms with that you said to yourself? Because I think that's a really hard realization for a lot of people.
It was hard. I was playing. So when I came to the decision around 18, almost 19, I was playing at let's say, junior elite level between ages 15 to 18.
Okay.
But in hindsight, I could see I wasn't progressing as quickly as other people. I wasn't on the national team, things like that. So I made the decision at around 18, and then I did have a year where I didn't know what I wanted to do, at least a year, if not more. Took a gap year between high school and college. I was always going to go to college. That was always my parents' push. They always said education is critical. So that I'm also grateful for. I guess I went in there with a different mindset. The first mindset would have been go in and do it on the side.
Sure.
But I went in actually much more exploring, and to some extent not knowing exactly what I wanted to be, but at least knowing that doing well academically is important just to learn, but also as a way to open doors later on in life.
Oh, that's fair. And I'm curious when you talk about, because there's a great debate, at least here in the US. I mean, you've been all over the world, so you may have had some other experiences and influences, at least here in the US right now. And I've interviewed a few people on the show when we talk about leadership. I know I'm going back in time here, but
Mm,
it's just interesting to me. Um, my middle son, we were talking right before, he's sort of taking a gap year and deciding what does he want to do with his life. He wants to do media production and some other things. Like, do I go to college for that? He's already got these certifications.
yeah.
And you said you'd always plan to go to college. Looking back from where you're at now, is that something you are thankful for? You're like, hey, I'm glad I went to college. I'm glad I got this experience. Is there something you would change about that?
Mm.
Where did you attend school? Was it here in the States or was it abroad?
It was abroad. It was in Denmark,
Okay.
Copenhagen Business School. I did do a semester at Wharton in Philadelphia, and then also in my master, I did a double degree in Paris and Copenhagen. So it was a little bit international.
Oh,
I think, to
wow.
be honest, the world has changed a lot in the last 15 years. I graduated with my master's in 2011. And
Okay.
that was back when, social media, the way we had it today, wasn't really taking off. There was, of course, no AI. iPhones were quite new or hadn't even come out. I can't remember. But back then, the world was still very much get a degree and in order to be employable. Like that was really the
Sure.
mindset. Today, I think it's radically different. And I think to answer your question, it really depends on people's goals. It's still important if you want to get into a big, let's say, brand name employer or Fortune 500. I would still say that having the credentials is important because it proves that you have done certain things in your life. That being said, if you want to be an entrepreneur, a solopreneur, or just totally carve out your own path, which more people are doing, then
Sure.
it's probably not worth taking 4 or 5 or 6 years without pay to learn something which is going to be out of date pretty quickly. So at least when I was in school, it was still the prevailing path. And I wanted to, I knew I did want to get into business and get some experience early on, which was, I wouldn't change that. So for me, it was the right decision. Probably other things, I could have done differently, but I think the university at age 18, 19, I wasn't ready to go do something more dynamic, if you
Right.
will.
I'm in my late 40s. I don't know if I'm ready still. Like it's
Yeah,
it's one of
exactly.
those things you have so much to wait. No, I was just curious of your thoughts on that because I think
Yeah.
it's I agree with you. I think that the world has evolved and a lot because of the things that like you mentioned, social media, AI, a lot of the tools that are at our fingertips when it comes to running a business, being an entrepreneur, and so forth.
Yeah.
So I was just curious on your perspective. One thing before we get too far into the show, I want to make sure and share these as well. Uh, for anybody that would, if you're listening on the audio podcast or if you're watching online later, you can make sure and connect with Nikolai on LinkedIn. It's the LinkedIn. If you look for Nikolai Nielsen, you generally will come up. You came right up for me, but
Oh,
if you're
wonderful.
typing it in, it's linkedin.com/n/Nikolai CN. So it's NICOLAICN. I'm spelling it out just to make sure if somebody's looking for it and you're listening on the audio podcast. Also, potentialacademy.org. You can check out potentialacademy.org for more info and to connect there. Like I said, he's building this personal development platform that's awesome. So it's one of those things. Do you see? And I'm curious. I'm going to dovetail off the college question. So Potential Academy, and let's talk about that for a second. Is this something that someone can get into and do their own online personal development, steer towards entrepreneurship? And I'm not saying necessarily in place of college. Is that something that's a bolt-on component for college? Is this
Mm.
more of an after college component? Can you expand on what Potential Academy is a little bit? And is that something that potentially could be a replacement for an entrepreneur? They say, hey, I want to go in and learn this and do this and grow.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, the vision of Potential Academy is to bring a lot of education and inspiration, which isn't currently offered, at least on its scale, and is quite broad in terms of what it covers. And there's a lot of things that aren't covered in college. So it's going to be less technical skills. It's going to be much more. Today, there are two courses. One is around, it's called Personal Pathfinder, which is really around who am I, what are my values, and what do I want to go in life. It
Sure.
doesn't mean solving your purpose, but it means at least solving your next steps that you're excited to take. I see a lot of people both around the college age, but also people with 15 years of experience, my peers, who are actually quite lost because they've never really had to ask the question, where do I want to go? And I can create any reality I want, or I can, go any professional path I want, but I actually have no clue where that is. So that's one pain point I see quite a lot of. The other course is called Inner Edge, which is around sustainable peak performance. And here there's also a lot of appetite for it, because a lot of people feel like, okay, I like my job or I like where I am, but I'm exhausted. It's too much. It's too hectic. I'm working too many hours. So how do I actually manage it better? Uh,
I'm
I'm
saying
going
that's me.
crazy. Oh,
No,
okay.
no, I'm saying that's me. I
Yeah, I
feel that.
think it's a bit all of us, because it's to some extent the way we're living is not sustainable, right? And I think that it's a bit challenging the status quo, and it's a lot about energy management, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual. But with that, you become a well-rounded human being, right? It's really about self-awareness and making deliberate choices. So that's another one. I think the more broadly with Potential Academy, it would be things like entrepreneurship. It would be things like actually creating business as a vehicle for what you want to do with your life and how to add value to other people. But starting small, it's 2 courses, and that's where I would recommend people go first if that's what they're interested in.
Awesome. No, so let's dive into some specific leadership questions. Now, thank you for sharing all the background and your history and sort of where you've come from and so forth. I think it's fascinating that you got the opportunity to attend school all over the place and had some different influences and
Yeah.
really have an opportunity to see. So going maybe leaning a little bit on this. So you have a best-selling book, Leadership at Scale. And I just based on the name, I want you to expand on it. How did you arrive at leadership at scale? How do you leadership is a very hard thing to measure. And I've done this
Mm.
now, like I said, for years. There are not KPIs necessarily for leadership. I mean, there are and there aren't, depends on who you ask. I had a good friend of mine on the show, gosh, a couple of years ago now. And I remember he said one of the most profound things, because we talk about, well, what are these leadership qualities? What does a good leader look like? How does a good
Mm.
manager, how does this person do this? And I remember one of the things that he said, and it just has stuck with me. And like, I feel like, oh, I wish I had picked up on that earlier in life. One of the key things is he said, well, leaders have to get results.
Mm.
He says, because you can measure like in all these different places, but you can't necessarily measure things like character. You can't necessarily measure things like, are they a good leader or are they not? Because there's not tangible metrics attached to some of it. So when you
Yeah.
go in and you've got your book and you said, okay, well, I'm going to write Leadership at Scale. Can you expand on how did you arrive at that and just tell
Yeah.
us a little bit more about it?
Yeah, it was a book that took 5 years in the making. And I was definitely very fortunate because I came in to McKinsey as a generalist, meaning I did all kinds of different stuff, just a lot of strategy work, but also everything from marketing to operations to
Mhm.
procurement and so forth. I always liked the people side of things. So I ended up specializing within the first 3 years, started to gravitate much more towards organizational topics. So talent development, culture change, and so forth. But within that, leadership was something I found fascinating even before, always buying books and reading about leadership. And I was lucky in a way where I got to work with some fantastic, very experienced people at McKinsey.
Mhm.
Um, was fortunate to do the work. So I actually worked with, 20, 30 companies on leadership development. And McKinsey's sweet spot was really not developing one leader. There's a lot of books about developing a leader, or how do you develop as a leader. A lot of books around team leadership, which are valuable, but what they were missing was this notion of scale, that we had so many companies going through a transformation, which still today, of course, is happening. Companies want to become more agile, more customer centric, more digitally enabled, whatever it is, they're all going through some kind of big change. And the leadership was often it was just not scalable. So the
Sure.
book came out of the work we did, trying to answer the question, how do we develop or improve leadership capacity of a company across maybe 1,000 leaders, or in some cases 10,000 leaders with the really big companies. So that's the crust of it. You have to really shift the system around a company. I see leadership as a small circle within a big circle of culture. It's a component of culture, but there's more. And that's where we felt there was a gap in the market, that how do you shift or transform hundreds of thousands of leaders at a time? That's something that we focused on.
No, that's really powerful. And I think you're right, is so often in business we look at the leader.
Yeah.
right? Well, here's this person, or especially if we're talking about entrepreneurship, like we were talking about that just a moment ago, you're it, right? You're the one, the tip of the spear. You're the one person. So I think it's interesting where you're saying, yeah, well, we need to be able to spread that more than just on the individual.
Yeah, and we did
I'm
measure it. You asked about KPIs,
yeah,
and
yeah,
that
yeah,
was one thing I always liked doing leadership or culture work with McKinsey, because it was always the combination of metrics, quantifiable data, and then the deeper inner practices on the other side. So, and I've seen both. When it's just one extreme or the other, it doesn't work. You need both together. So we measured leadership. You can measure leadership. There are many ways to define leadership. Ask
sure,
5 people and you'll get 6 answers. But to
right.
keep it simple, we said leadership is a set of observable behaviors which do certain things. They align a company, they execute well, et cetera, et cetera. But there are a set of observable behaviors, and to do these the behaviors are driven by underlying mindsets and skills. So that also means, number one, you can measure leadership by asking people to rate the degree to which someone is doing objective, observable behaviors that are specific and concrete. It also means that anyone can display these behaviors. So it's not that you have to be a certain way or a certain character to be an effective leader. However, it does mean that some people are more naturally effective in certain contexts because that's just who they are. But it doesn't mean that anyone can be charismatic and extroverted if they learn how. Some people just find it easier than others.
So you'd say leadership can be taught.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I do. I would definitely say leadership can be taught, but again, some people are more inclined to be a good leader. Basketball can be taught, but some people will just naturally be a better basketball player. So leadership is the
Sure.
same. Everyone can become better, but some people are just more effective. And it does come down to not just the behaviors, but they're driven by they're driven by the being, the person behind the behaviors. And some people, when you think about inspirational, very evolved human beings, I mean, that's hard to replicate because they just are something special, and they've probably worked on themselves for 20 years to get there.
Sure. Well, I mean, I've always said there's no replacement for experience, right? You can have some people that have the aptitude for that. And the reason I asked that question, I mean, I think that's one of the benefits to a show like this podcast is, hey, we talk about what are the things that are the wins and the losses, and what was effective, and how did you arrive at these things, and we have those conversations. And I think people can watch that and learn. Just because they could get better at it today, I hear what you're saying.
Mm.
It doesn't mean they're going to be an awesome or effective leader right away tomorrow. It takes practice. It has to
Yeah.
be repeated. You have to execute on the stuff. And but I do think, I mean, to answer my own question, I agree with you. I do
Mm.
think leadership can be taught. I think
Yeah.
it's something that there are certain traits, and inevitably, it's like anything in life. There are certain people that are going to be better leaders than others. It's just how it
Yeah.
is. There are
Yeah.
certain people that are going to be better engineers than others, or better hockey players than others. I grew up playing hockey, or better
Yeah.
soccer players than others.
Exactly.
It is what it is.
Well, and
Um,
different contexts require different leadership styles, because a fast growing,
Absolutely.
starting a company versus scaling a company versus taking a company public and then running it, very different situations. And I think it's totally okay to say, if you're not adapted to one of them. Some people don't like a ton of uncertainty and a lot of change all the time. Some people actually prefer more structure and repetition, right? And you have different leadership. Some companies are very B2B versus B2C, also just a very radically different approach on how you even think about the customer and product development. And that's fine. I think it's more about being aware and clear of what in this context is the leadership need, and then who is the best fit to get us there.
I think that's a really good statement. And I often, I try to make sure and repeat things that are of value to me. I sit and learn so much from my guests, Nikolai. So I thank
Yeah.
you for this. You said, like, what is the need? I think that's something that often we'll miss, especially, someone like myself, or you're tuning into a podcast. I got a type A personality, and it'd be easy for me to look at Nikolai and go, hey,
Mm.
what are the 5 best characteristics of leadership? And like you said, ask 5 people,
Yeah.
get 6 answers. You're going to
Yeah.
say, well, here's these things, and they're unstoppable and they're awesome. But is that what the company needs right now? I think that's a
Yeah.
very, very profound statement that you just made. Like, you have to look at what is needed in this situation for the company. Super
And that
valuable.
comes back to strategy. But one thing we always did was we started with what are the company's objectives and strategy, and what's the value drivers behind that strategy? Like literally, how do you make money? And that's why I found a lot of the McKinsey work so inspirational, because we start by saying, how do you make money? And then how, and of course, there's more to strategy. There's also being a great org company and customers and products and so forth. But we want to get it down to the core of how do you create value internally and externally, and then what are the behaviors that are needed to get you there. And that's going to look, that's why if you look leadership in Toyota versus leadership in Apple versus leadership in a manufacturing company, they're going to be very, very different. Effective leadership is going to look very different, and that's because their business models are different, that's because their customers are different, that's because their products are different. So we start by saying strategy and then leadership model with a set of again, observable objective behaviors, and then the intervention, if you will, or the work becomes, where are you compared to these aspirational behaviors, and then how do we actually bridge the gap to where you want to go? We can't do everything at once, so we're going to have to focus on a handful, 2 to 3 behaviors in the first 12 months, maybe, give or take, and then go to the next ones.
So I'm taking notes. I want to point this out, and for anybody who's listening, I want you to hear this loud and clear, because something you just picked up on is you said, okay, well, it's this sort of what, where, why, or what, where, how, sort of strategy. And you don't, Nikolai, I love interviewing people like you, because you don't even realize that you said this, and it's like it's phenomenal. It's for anybody, if you are, it doesn't matter if you're building or scaling. And this is my opinion. I'm taking this from what Nikolai just shared. He said, well, determine the strategy and the leadership model. That's the what. Like, what are we doing here, right? And you ask the question specifically, like, how do you make money at this, right? So what are we doing? So you ask the what question. You asked the where question with where are you in this process? You said, where are we right now? Like, where are we at the beginning? Where are we headed, and so forth? It's that pathfinder piece, probably a little bit like you mentioned earlier. And then the third, you simply asked, well, how do we get there? And
Yeah.
so I think that really good leaders and good consultants, good people to have on your side, ask really good questions like that are so simple but are so valuable to ask in any situation in leadership and in business.
Yeah.
So very valuable share there.
No, I appreciate that you found that valuable. And another question that just came to mind when you said that, another, like,
Yeah.
you're right, simple questions are good, because I also sometimes like to complicate questions. But
Right.
another one would be, what's getting in the way? And I think often that's also immensely valuable, and that's where the depth gets in, when that's where the work becomes let's say a little bit more specialized, for lack of better words. But then you start to see things that in a company or a culture are so ingrained, right?
Oh
Mindsets,
man.
perspectives, ways of viewing the world, that if we want to make the shift from, let's say, product focused to customer centric, as an example,
Sure.
um, there are some real underlying, it comes down to a lot of unconscious needs and fears that people have. They don't even know they have them, but we actually don't like change, or we don't like being uncomfortable, we don't like being outside our comfort zone. So that's where you get into the depth of it. And then to do the work meaningfully, you can't just tell people from tomorrow you must be customer centric. That's a joke I like to make. You know, a CEO sends an email, everyone from tomorrow, this is the leadership model, please implement. Right? Like that's where we're human beings at the end of the day, and changing behaviors requires changing so many things that aren't seen. And that's where it can take 12 months just to shift 1 or 2 behaviors meaningfully. It can take 3 years to transform a culture, if not more. So this also takes time.
Well, and no, you're spot on. I think I can visualize in my head, and let me walk anyone else through my head so they can see this, like the diagram that you're drawing out. Okay, so what do we want? What's the strategy? What's the leadership model? Where are we at? Like, where are we headed, and where are we for real? How do we get there? And then you add this fourth question with what's getting in the way. Because if you started with a different strategy at the beginning, that's the circle, right? You come back around and go, okay, well, time for a new strategy. If we're
Yeah.
it can't just be based off of one email, CEO wings it. I hear exactly what you're saying. And man, you are so spot on when you're saying that, what's getting in the way. We as, I would say as leaders, but we as humans fall in love with things being the same. And it's very easy to fall into complacency that way. I think
Mm.
you said it here. It's like people don't like change. And so when we go, well, we're going to go from this place to this other place over here, and you start asking what's getting in the way. And I've done this in meetings where I've asked people, hey, what are we? Here's another good question, and this is really really simple. I have looked directly at staff members and said, hey, what are we doing that's dumb?
Mm.
And nobody answers. It's like crickets. The
Yeah.
first time you ask that question, everybody is completely quiet because they're like, I don't want to tell. It's like in their mind, they're going,
They
it's a
know it.
trap.
They know
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Yeah. They're like, this is the dumbest thing we do. If I was in charge, we would change this. But when you actually articulate that question, you say, hey, what do we do here at this business that's dumb? They're like, it's a trap.
Yeah.
You know? And so you have to slow down and be very genuine in the way that you present that. But when you
Yeah.
ask that question, you know, what do we do that's dumb? What's getting in the way? What's getting in the way of you doing your job? What's getting in the way of moving from this place to the next? Super powerful thought there.
Yeah. And I think then to close a circle, then you have something around measuring the results, or how are we
Yes.
doing, what's progress. And with that comes, well, a couple of thoughts. One is, I think not nearly enough leaders do 360 assessments or just basically get feedback. And I always see all kinds of excuses, leaders saying it's too much time. We can't ask people to fill in 10 minutes worth of their time times, X many leaders. They have all kinds of excuses, or they do it and don't actually do anything with the results. But for me, that's so baffling, because that's the gold mine to actually develop as a leader and as a company, that you're getting feedback and you just want to do better and you're open about it. At the company level, I've also done a lot of work with what often is called employee engagement, but I call it employee voice. I work with Peakon, that was bought out by Workday, and they called it employee voice. It's not about just engagement. It's employee voice because it's a mechanism to provide this feedback in a structured basis. But you can provide feedback on everything, not just about how engaged am I, but also feedback on, for example, during COVID, do I feel safe to return to work? Feedback on things like, do I have the right skills to do my job, my manager, etc. So it's just more like a tool to have this real anonymous or confidential feedback in the system. And that for me is also so powerful, because many companies choose not to do it, or they do it once a year, and then they don't really do much with the results. They massage the results and share something high level. But I've also worked with companies that are just, they're bold. It's a journey to get there, but they say, we're going to collect employee voice feedback confidentially in some cases every month, some companies even more frequently. We're actually going to show that the results publicly. Not everyone's going to like it, and then we're going to do something about it, and we're going to get better. It's like radical transparency, but they will develop much quicker than companies that just shy away from it.
I think that's really valuable. And I think it can be hurtful sometimes, and not intentionally, but if you're screwing something up, it's like anybody, right? High performers, leaders, managers, business owners, people that are in those high performance positions, if something's not going right, genuinely, they want to know. It may sting. They want to know that. And so I think so far, I wrote this down also. Again, simple but profound. If you're going to ask your staff, if you're going to ask the people that are around you that you're leading for feedback, do something about it.
Yeah.
Just write that down, do something about it. Because I too have been part of companies where it's like, oh, we're going to do this big, every 6 months or a year, we're going to get this big thing. And we're going to get all this feedback, and oh my gosh, it's going to be awesome. And you get everything. And then it lands on somebody's desk somewhere, and it's like, so what?
Yeah.
So what? Nothing's going to change. And then people get accustomed to that, and it just goes right down the drain. So that's a huge point is if you're going to ask for the feedback, if you're going to say, hey, what are we doing that's dumb? If we're going to ask people what's getting in the way, then take action and do something about it.
Yeah.
So
I do think everyone should be on a personal development journey 24/7. It's not just about leaders, and it's not just about the world we live in today, but I think being fulfilled in life is basically moving towards the best version of yourself. And that's going to be a continuous journey. But it also means actually taking steps 24/7. Picking one thing at a time. I've noticed that I'm not a good listener, for example. And I mean, the best place is at home. You learn so much about yourself with your partner or spouse because you're with them all the time. But if you then have the desire to actually get better, I want to learn how to be more empathetic, or I want to learn how to do certain things, then that's your focus. And if you work on it, in a couple of months, you will be visibly better. Not perfect, but better. I think a lot of people just don't, in a way, and maybe they've never really learned how to work on themselves. But then, of course, over 6 months, life just kind of, at least personal development wise, stays roughly the same. And I think that's a missed opportunity.
Well, and I think one of the reasons so often that people don't, and I've been guilty of this, is if you're going to work on yourself, it means you have to first admit there's something that needs work.
Yeah.
It takes bruising your ego and going, "Oh, I kind of suck at this thing,"
Of
and that
course.
that
Yeah.
hurts, right?
Yeah. And you
So,
need a safe environment as well. I mean, it's not fun to do it if you're going to get, if it's going to be used against you or what might be.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So a couple of reminders for people that are watching or listening. I encourage you connect with Nikolai on LinkedIn, Nikolai Nielsen. It's on linkedin.com/n/NICOLAICN, Nikolai CN. And then also you can check out his website at potentialacademy.org, where, as we've mentioned, he does online personal development. We've had a lot of conversation on that, personal growth and education, inspiration, motivation. He's got a couple of great courses there, so make sure you check those out. I want to dive into something that you said here a minute ago, because you said you've stated this a couple of times. And you said, well, it's about leadership today. And one of the sort of conversation starters when we were exchanging emails, we were talking about, hey, what are qualities of leaders today versus in the future, and so forth. First, before we answer that question, or before we even go there, I'm curious, what are, and just from your perspective, because again, you've been a world traveler, you've attended college in different places, phenomenal background where you were specializing in leadership development, you've moved into this personal development space. What are a few of the key qualities, just the broad qualities that go, transcend any business and so forth, that you would say leaders possess right now today? And then second part of the question is, how does that differ, or does that differ from leaders of the past? And let me frame this a little bit. I'll come back to the question. Like if we looked, in the 80s or 90s, it was all about management, and then team management, and then leadership, and then team leadership. You get these sort of buzzwords as things evolve, but do the qualities change? So that's the question is, what are the key qualities that transcend multiple facets of business, multiple areas of business in leadership? And then how is that different today from how it was in the past? Let's start there from your perspective.
I definitely think there are some cross-cutting qualities of a leader, and to a large extent, they are, to be a good leader, you need to be a evolved human being. I like to say that because there's so much inner development that that helps, being aware of who you are, being aware of what you're good at, being aware of what you're less good at, being humble, being open to feedback, willing to act on the feedback, being a good listener. These are just qualities that make someone a pleasant, compassionate, wise human being. But then with that, with the leadership angle comes a few additional things. There's something around knowing where you want to go. So I think the leader has to have the vision, even if it's not 100% clear, being clear and being actually quite stubborn about that vision, seeing a future that many people can't see, or at least helping to paint a picture for them to see it, I think is a very important quality of a leader. And then a leader has to be able to both get results, and that means different things today than in the past, but you still have to be able to set goals, measure goals, give feedback, and steer and adapt and make sure results actually happen. In parallel, bringing out the best of the people that you work with. So I think these qualities don't change. That is really part and parcel. It's almost like Lego blocks. You need to have these building blocks to be an effective person and an effective leader. And then, of course, today's context throws additional demands on leaders that are different from the past.
And so I'm going to recap just these three first, because I like the way that you said, hey, you got to be an evolved human. And then you included a lot of those traditional characteristics from leadership, where you said, personal development, inner development, humility, good listener, compassionate. So step one is evolved human. Step two, you said vision, clarity, and being stubborn about it. I like the fact that you shared that. It's like you got to be in love with where you're headed, and it doesn't mean that it never changes, but you got to be in love with where you're headed right now. And then I shared earlier, and you're probably the second or third person on the show over all this time that said, hey, you got to get results and measure them, even though the results may look different across different industries. What are the results you're looking for? And did the person in charge get those? Like those are simple questions. So when you're saying that, today versus yesterday, what would you say are some, because you said those are pretty consistent. I'm assuming you think those are going to remain consistent on into the future, the next decade, the next 50 years on and so forth.
Yeah.
What are some things that you believe have changed or will change?
Yeah, I would add one more on the non-changing ones, which is around getting the best out of people. And I think that's the balance that many people, it's actually quite difficult. You want to be task-oriented and you also want to be relationship-oriented. And many assessments actually measure behaviors in both spectrums. And you see some leaders gravitate to being very results-driven and not very people-oriented. And you see some actually being too people-oriented, being too nice. They don't like difficult conversations. And then sometimes the results or deadlines are missed. So that's kind of a balance that can in itself be a challenge. For the difference today, I mean, people have probably heard many of these buzzwords, but it's interesting when we actually dissect what that means for a leader. We know the world moves much more quickly today. And the analogy is in consulting, you used to have a couple of weeks to just diagnose, maybe a month to diagnose the company, get an understanding of where they currently are and what the weaknesses are and so forth, a mini SWOT analysis, whatever. I mean, now today, that's probably done in the proposal phase or in within the first week. So everything has just become shorter. You're expected to do things more quickly. And of course, with AI, you are expected to deliver more. So for people who have high agency, that's a positive because they're like, wow, I can do all these things now that I couldn't do before, and I can get so much work done in 4 hours. For people with low agency, it's a threat because they actually feel like they can be replaced. So there's a speed. There's of course also the fact that things competitive advantage is much less durable than in the past. I mean, I remember learning competitive strategy where we literally would learn competitive or strategic moves that would safeguard your competitive advantage for years on end, right? You could build a factory to preempt the competition from making new supply. You could lower your prices if you had a bigger balance sheet than the competitors to drive them out of business. All that stuff has changed because now anyone pretty much can rent capacity, rent manufacturing, rent whatever they need, set up their own thing. So everyone is able to do much more quickly. So that also means that the company, you can't just assume that you are able to do what you've always done. So the degree of change is quicker, and it also means that you need to be bolder, because I think the future is, again, it's platitudes. We've heard it. The future is changing so quickly and so forth. But if you take any company and say, where will you be 5 years from now? It's so dramatically different than I think many leaders can't even see that. And when they can't see that, they're going to be constantly playing catch up because there are startups who are seeing it and they are getting into it. And 5 years is long. 1 year is short, but 5 years is long. So there is also that you need to be bold and you need to actually take risks. And that goes against, I think, a lot of what incumbents are used to, which is safeguarding and minimizing risks.
That's fair. I'm curious. I one of the things you were talking about, competitive advantage, because speed, being bold. Just I want to hang on that statement about competitive advantage. How can a business, how can a leader, how can anyone in business have a competitive advantage today? Because I hear what you're saying too. I think with AI, when you were saying, hey, you have to have that in the proposal phase or maybe up to a week. In my head, what went through my head was 48 hours, right? Okay, if I do the proposal, I get a couple of days to assess and so forth, which is significantly different than in the past. So what do you see are some things that businesses can do to have, and leaders can do to have a competitive advantage right now in today's environment and moving forward, other than just speed? Because if everybody's running the race, everybody's running fast, everybody's doing the stuff like you said, everybody has pretty much the same access to resources, similar time, and so on and so forth. You can go after funding, you can go after grants, you can go after all that stuff aside. What are some individualistic things, I guess, that a
Yeah.
business can do to create a competitive advantage?
Yeah, I think a few things comes to mind. One, there are some things where you just have the only thing that's available. So it could be you have a patent, or if you're the only hairdresser in town, people can't order a hairdresser online. So then you have an advantage that at some point will run out, but at least it's there at that moment in time. Brand, of course, gets talked about a lot, but what I think is different now is that there's so much online reviews, and you have reviews of employees rating their company, first of all, which is a bit like the external facing employee voice, where they're externally giving their company a rating based on different areas. So prospective employees can read about it. But also, I think more and more business models are moving towards the car sharing model, where products are visible in real time, prices actually fluctuate in real time, and both the customer and the supplier or the company are rated. Right, Airbnb is an example, and I think we'll see that growing much more. And many things today, you go to ChatGPT or AI and you say, "Give me a review of this company from Reddit," for example. Right, Reddit is qualitative, but at least it can spit out some pretty interesting reviews. And I think we will see more and more quantitative ratings as well. There's, I think it's called Trust. There's a website that gives a score, and it's actually quite widely used. So
Trustpilot.
Trustpilot, yeah. I think it was actually set up in Denmark. So another competitive advantage is just not just being good, but listening, right? It's back to that adaptability, that you actually care about your customers. You're listening. I've seen companies who go on and actually respond to negative feedback and say, "Thank you, we want to do better," and do something. I've also seen companies that basically go on and have an argument with the customer and says, "You were there on a bad day," or "I've never seen you," or it's again quite baffling, right? So I think you can address these things in a way that where you want to learn and get better, because then the competitive advantage becomes your ability to constantly be customer centric, adapt, and provide value to the market. Change your product if the product needs to be changed, but it is around value. And maybe one more I'll throw in there is around people. I think I've seen this so many times. Companies that can deliver results and treat their employees really well and create fantastic environments where people can flourish as individuals will continue to attract the best talent, and then they will by nature be successful.
The thing that's interesting as I hear you talk, Nikolai, and going from, I have a pretty long span in business. And I know, 80s and 90s, late 80s and 90s, like I said, that everybody was moving into the information age, and everything just had to be fast. And you said that as well, like, hey, everything's got to be fast now, right? We went into the information age, then social media and AI and all of these things that are just moving light speed compared to where we came from. But the things that you leaned on when I said, hey, what are the competitive advantage? And I want people to hear this, because there's no replacement for humanity. There's no replacement for just being human. And you said things like listening to people, like providing good, like for you to listen to people, there's a human behind that. For you to, when you were saying, hey, if when you were talking about these, even the like being bold or getting these customer reviews and so forth. One thing that I've seen happen in business so often, when employees are going to leave a review, it's when they're on their exit, right? They're leaving. Yeah. So the only way to get good reviews is to live it and breathe it and be human with the people and actually genuinely care and actually genuinely listen and invest in training, invest in growing people, invest in all the human parts that are, to some extent, a little bit intangible. Yeah, I mean, yes, we can see people grow, we can see them move to a better place. But when you're talking about being customer centric, what does it take to be customer centric? You actually have to care about the customer.
And that starts with culture.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
you have to have the people on the other side who care about the customer.
So one last thing I want to ask about that you had put in here. You said how level of consciousness is tied to leadership effectiveness. And you spend a lot of time on personal development, You spent a lot of time studying this stuff. In fact, the very first thing, and I may be, we may be circling back to this. You said that, a good trait of a good leader is to be an evolved human. So can you expand on that statement? How is someone's level of consciousness, or maybe being an evolved human, how is that tied to good leadership, leadership effectiveness, and future
Mm,
leadership development of oneself?
mm, mm. Yeah, it's a big question, and I think we're actually just scratching the surface, and there's so much more to uncover.
We got to do another show.
We have to do another show, exactly. Well, also beyond us, there's
Yeah,
so much
that's
more to
fair.
be done here. But we should definitely do another show. What's interesting is in the personal development literature, and when you get really to the deeper stuff that goes into psychology and philosophy and spirituality, they end up all saying very, very similar things, whether you go to hardcore psychologist route or the spiritual route with the chakras, or the philosophical route about what it means to live a good life. You see that they all say similar things, and there are levels, if you will, of what you can call consciousness or evolution or a way of seeing the world, um, that people go through in their life. It's clear to see a child is often very focused on themselves and they want safety and security. A teenager is also very focused on getting their needs met. But from there, you can break into higher levels where you focus, first of all, more on win-win, for example. You focus more about your values and crafting a life that's aligned with who you are as a human being. And even beyond that, you start to see yourself being part of a whole, and you see yourself as being in service of something greater than yourself. You start seeing yourself as a vehicle to create positive change in the world. So these are levels that have been mapped. You can measure them. And generally, what you see is that when people ascend up the levels, they are able to see the world from a broader perspective. They're able to integrate different points of views. They're more compassionate. They're better at understanding other people and so forth. So there's a lot of positive traits. Now, there was some research that came out from the Leadership Circle profile, which is a very deep psychometric 360, and they have a book called Mastering Leadership, and it came out at least 5 years ago, and I was just blown away because they show that the level of leadership effectiveness, and they have hundreds of thousands of data points, is
Mhm.
highly correlated with a person's level of internal development or emotional intelligence, all these things which help a person just be more self-aware. And at the highest level, you could say, if you're a low level of development means you're often acting out of fear, your own fears, or you see the world as a cruel place that's very unfair, and it's all about getting your needs met. And you know how people act when they act out of fear. They're just not themselves. They're not their best selves. The reverse of that would be acting out of creative courage, where you believe the world is an open place where there's abundance, and where you believe that by being your best version of yourself, you can actually create much more value for others. And I think that's a very interesting dichotomy that you can see if someone is acting from a place of fear or acting from a place of the opposite of scarcity, abundance. It's just like day and night. And I think that's where a leader is either trying to control everything because they're fearful, or they're actually trying to empower everyone and make them better because they believe that together we can do something even more fantastic.
It's a phenomenal answer. And you're right. This could be a whole nother show. We could get a whole panel of people. And I think it's
Yeah.
really, really valuable. So, Nikolai, as we're headed to the tail end here, I'll remind people one more time. I've had it on the screen here. First off, man, just thank you so much for making the time. I know it's late there in Italy where you're at, so making the time to sit and share with me and share with my audience. And I got, as always, I got a couple pages worth of notes here. I sit and scribble all this down and then go recap it later. I know that as I'm sitting and listening and learning, and you have a refreshing way of presenting stuff as well. I know that as I'm learning some of that, the people that are tuning into the show now and in the future will be as well. So I thank you so much for that. It's appreciated.
Oh, I love the conversation. Thank you, Mike.
And if you any final thoughts that you want to take us out with, I'll give you a second to think on that. I'll remind everybody uh, to connect with Nikolai Nielsen. You can go on LinkedIn. It's linkedin.com/n/NiColaicn. So Nikolai CN there on LinkedIn. Check out his website at potentialacademy.org and check out the courses that he's got offered there. I'm sure that, I mean, more than we could ever fit into a 45-minute or hour-long conversation. So um, just an absolute blessing today, Nikolai. Any final thoughts that you'd like to take us out with, sir?
No, it's definitely been a fun conversation. I mean, a final thought. I often see people not daring to think boldly enough. So my challenge would be, think of the people listening, think of your life and think of where you want to be in 3 to 5 years, and allow yourself to actually dream big and then go for it. Because in 3 to 5 years, you can and will transform your life if you're disciplined about it. Usually people, they actually play a bit small and think this is just the way it's going to be.
Love it. No, be bold. I love that
Be
closing
bold.
statement. If you would hang out for just a minute, I'm going to go ahead and take us out. Okay.
Thanks.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's going to bring us to a close for another episode of the Leadership Toolkit with my new friend, Nikolai Nielsen. Man, what a great conversation. What a great show. Just wealth of knowledge. I encourage everybody, you know, as you're listening to this again now or in the future, maybe you listened live, maybe you're listening later, connect with him on LinkedIn, check out his website. Also, one way that this show continues to grow, please do me a favor, throw some thumbs up on it, whatever platform you may be watching on, you know, make a comment. I'd love to have continue the conversation in the comments section on any of these shows, whether it's Spotify or YouTube or Apple or whatever platform you may be choosing to tune into the show on. And then last and certainly not least, one of the most important and valuable things you can do for somebody, this show is about growth. It's about growing yourself. And like I said, it's about growing your circle. So if you know somebody that would gain some insight from listening to this conversation, just share it with them. Whether it's one person or a company of 100 people that you go, man, we got to listen to this. Share it with somebody, right? Don't just keep it to yourself. I mean, certainly do sit and take notes and listen in and learn and grow for yourself, but share it with somebody else that would grow as well. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, that's going to bring us to a close. Thank you so much for tuning in. Value your time. We'll talk to you soon. Till see you next week. Stay great.